In the spring of 1905, the undisputed hierarchy of global power rested on a single fragile assumption. European naval supremacy was absolute and unshakable. For centuries, Western empires had carved up the globe, their ironclad fleets serving as the ultimate arbiters of diplomacy and conquest. To challenge this dominance was considered not just strategic overreach, but civilizational folly. Yet shrouded in the heavy fogs of the Korea Strait, a rapidly modernizing Asian nation prepared to shatter that centuries-old illusion. The Imperial Japanese Navy lay in wait, poised to intercept an exhausted armada that had sailed halfway across the earth. The ensuing clash would not merely decide a war over territorial ambitions in Manchuria and Korea. It would instantly render existing battleships obsolete, ignite the fuse of revolution in Europe, and fundamentally rewrite the geopolitical order of the 20th century. The path to this unprecedented confrontation began with a catastrophic miscalculation in St. Petersburg. The Russo-Japanese War had erupted in 1904, driven by competing imperial designs over Port Arthur and the Korean Peninsula. When Japan dealt a crippling preemptive blow to the Russian Pacific Squadron, Tsar Nicholas II made a desperate, unprecedented gamble. He ordered the Baltic Fleet, a massive but wildly inconsistent collection of warships, to sail over 18,000 miles around the globe to relieve the besieged forces in the east. This was a logistical nightmare of unparalleled scale. Attrition, the military concept of wearing down an enemy to the point of collapse through continuous losses, was about to be tested not by enemy fire, but by the sheer friction of distance and time. Commanded by Admiral Zinovy Rozhestvensky, the Russian Armada embarked on an agonizing 7-month voyage that quickly descended into operational farce and tragedy. The fleet's paranoia was so acute that while passing through the North Sea, they mistook British fishing trawlers for Japanese torpedo boats, opening fire in what became known as the Dogger Bank Incident. This diplomatic disaster nearly brought the British Empire into the war against Russia and resulted in the fleet being denied access to the Suez Canal. Forced to navigate around the treacherous Cape of Good Hope, warships designed for the frigid Baltic Sea baked in tropical heat. Coal dust coated every surface, suffocating crews who were forced to load fuel at sea in perilous conditions. Mutinies simmered, machinery broke down, and tropical diseases ravaged the lower decks. By the time this battered armada neared the Sea of Japan in May 1905, they were not a conquering force, but a floating tragedy, desperate merely to reach the safety of the Russian port of Vladivostok. Waiting for them was Admiral Togo Heihachiro, a commander who had meticulously forged the Imperial Japanese Navy into a lethal, highly disciplined instrument of war. Togo understood that the survival of his nation hinged on total victory. A partial defeat or a Russian breakthrough to Vladivostok would prolong the conflict, draining Japan's fragile economy and manpower. Togo chose the Strait of Tsushima, the narrowest choke point between Korea and southern Japan, as his killing ground. He positioned his fleet perfectly, relying on a centralized command structure and a revolutionary technological advantage: wireless telegraphy. This allowed his scouting vessels to operate far over the horizon, casting an invisible net of surveillance across the gray waters. On the early morning of May 27th, the trap was sprung. A Japanese scout ship pierced the mist, transmitting a wireless message that would echo through naval history, confirming the enemy fleet was in sight and steering for the strait. Togo sortied his combined fleet, raising the Z flag on his flagship, the Mikasa. The signal conveyed a stark, unifying directive to his men. As Togo famously signaled, "The fate of the empire depends on this one battle. Let every man do his utmost." The psychological weight of that moment galvanized the Japanese sailors, contrasting sharply with the fatalistic exhaustion gripping the Russian crews. As the two massive fleets closed the distance, the fundamental disparity in their preparation became brutally apparent. The Japanese possessed superior optical rangefinders and a highly refined system of centralized fire control, allowing their gunnery officers to direct salvos with terrifying precision. More importantly, their gunners fired high explosive shells packed with Shimose powder. This highly sensitive, devastatingly hot explosive was designed to detonate on contact, shredding superstructures, starting uncontrollable fires, and decimating exposed crews with storms of shrapnel. The Russian armor-piercing shells, by contrast, often failed to detonate, passing harmlessly through the thin upper plating of the Japanese cruisers or tumbling uselessly into the sea. Recognizing his tactical superiority, Togo executed a maneuver that remains a hallmark of extreme tactical audacity, the crossing of the T. By turning his line of battle directly across the advancing Russian columns, Togo allowed his entire fleet to bring their broadside guns to bear, while the Russians could only fire their forward turrets. To achieve this, the Japanese ships had to execute a U-turn in sequence, a perilous movement that temporarily exposed each vessel to concentrated enemy fire at the pivot point. The maneuver required iron discipline and unwavering nerve, and the gamble paid off spectacularly. The resulting bombardment was an apocalypse of steel and fire. The Russian flagship, Suvorov, was quickly engulfed in flames, its steering shattered, forcing it out of the line and leaving the rest of the fleet in headless confusion. Without centralized command, the Russian formation disintegrated into isolated pockets of desperate resistance. Within hours, the pride of the Russian Navy was reduced to burning, sinking hulks. Battleships capsized, trapping thousands of men in iron tombs beneath the churning waves. As night fell, Japanese torpedo boats swarmed the crippled remnants of the Armada, delivering the final, fatal blows in the darkness. The sheer scale of the destruction was incomprehensible to contemporary observers. Out of 38 Russian ships, 21 were sunk, 7 captured, and over 4,000 sailors were dead. The Japanese lost merely 3 torpedo boats and just over 100 men. It was a complete annihilation, a victory so absolute it defied military logic of the era. But as the smoke cleared over the Tsushima Strait, a profound question lingered in the war rooms of London, Washington, and Berlin. How could a supposedly inferior Asian power so thoroughly dismantle a European juggernaut? The answer lay not just in the courage of the sailors, but in a harsh mathematical reality that was about to render every existing navy obsolete. The Battle of Tsushima proved conclusively that naval engagements would no longer be decided by chaotic, close-range brawls involving mixed calibers of weaponry. The engagement demonstrated that extreme range, speed, and concentrated heavy firepower were the absolute dictates of modern naval warfare. Observers noted that the Japanese 12-inch guns did the vast majority of the lethal damage, while smaller secondary batteries were largely ineffective at such vast distances. This realization triggered an immediate, frantic paradigm shift in global naval architecture. The era of the mixed battery pre-Dreadnought battleship was instantly dead, swept away by the brutal efficiency demonstrated in the Strait. Within a year, the British Royal Navy launched HMS Dreadnought. This revolutionary vessel featured a uniform main battery of heavy guns and steam turbine propulsion, making it faster and vastly more lethal than anything afloat. It was a direct technological response to the brutal lessons learned from Admiral Togo's victory. Because this new design was so superior, it effectively reset the global naval balance to zero. Every major power was forced to start building these new leviathans from scratch, accelerating a massive global naval arms race. The staggering cost of these dreadnought fleets strained national economies and heightened geopolitical tensions, directly contributing to the complex web of paranoia and militarism that would ignite the First World War less than a decade later. While engineers in Western shipyards drafted new blueprints, the political shockwaves of the defeat fractured the Russian Empire from within. The total loss of the Baltic Fleet, combined with earlier humiliating defeats in Manchuria, stripped away the aura of Tsarist invincibility. The staggering human cost and the utter futility of the war effort acted as a catalyst for existing domestic unrest. The humiliation of 1905 fueled strikes, mutinies, and uprisings across Russia, compounding the tragedy of Bloody Sunday, where unarmed protesters were massacred in St. Petersburg. The disaster at Tsushima was a fatal crack in the foundation of the Romanov dynasty, exposing a regime that was technologically backward and strategically incompetent, setting the stage for the catastrophic revolutions that would follow a little over a decade later. Conversely, Japan's victory fundamentally altered the geopolitical map of the world. For the first time in modern history, an Asian nation had decisively defeated a major European power in a conventional war. This shattered the prevailing myth of Western military invincibility, sending shockwaves through the colonized world. It inspired anti-colonial movements across Asia and the Middle East, proving that with rapid modernization, industrialization, and rigorous discipline, the entrenched global hierarchy could be successfully challenged. Japan was immediately elevated to the status of a great power, securing its dominance over Korea and expanding its imperial footprint in mainland Asia. The echoes of that decisive clash resonated deeply within the strategic doctrines of the 20th century, shaping military thought for generations. The Imperial Japanese Navy internalized the victory at Tsushima as a validation of the Kantai-Kessen, or decisive battle doctrine. This philosophy dictated that future wars would be won through a single massive naval engagement, utilizing superior tactics, specialized night fighting, and sheer willpower to annihilate an advancing enemy fleet, just as Togo had done. It was a dangerous, almost mythological overlearning of history's lessons. Decades later, this rigid adherence to the Tsushima model would blind Japanese strategists to the harsh realities of a new era. When conflict erupted across the Pacific in the 1940s, they sought to replicate Togo's crushing victory against the United States Navy. However, the nature of warfare had shifted again. Logistics, massive industrial capacity, and the advent of naval aviation replaced the single decisive battleship clash. The very doctrine that had secured Japan's miraculous rise ultimately contributed to its catastrophic downfall, as they chased a phantom victory that modern, industrialized warfare no longer permitted. The waters of the strait remain quiet today, belying the immense violence that once tore through them. Yet, the legacy of the Russian Baltic Fleet and the Imperial Japanese Navy is permanently etched into the framework of the modern world. The battle stands as a stark testament to the unforgiving nature of technological progress and the devastating cost of strategic arrogance. In a matter of hours, the assumptions of generations were incinerated by high explosives and flawless tactical execution. The Battle of Tsushima was not merely the conclusion of the Russo-Japanese War. It was the violent birth of the Dreadnought era, a catalyst for imperial collapse, and the dawn of a new multipolar world order. It proved that supremacy is never permanent, and that the balance of global power can be rewritten in a single afternoon by those willing to embrace the ruthless, shifting currents of strategic innovation. The era of unquestioned Western maritime dominance ended in the cold gray waters off the coast of Japan, shifting the trajectory of human conflict forever.